Hi, I'm Old Sneelock. Welcome to another episode of Old Sneelock's Workshop. I've been asked which plane would I recommend. Well, this is a number 4. And for an all-around, something to just square edges up and knock corners down the way you want them, which is mostly what we use a plane for anymore. Especially if you're a power tool user, you'll break edges with a plane. This number 4 will do a fine job. It's a compromise between size and convenience. As far as size goes, it's big enough to do most of the tasks that you need. I've been asked, which plane would I buy first? Well, this is a Stanley low-angle block plane. And when it's sharp, it does a nice job of cutting off end grain. The low angle means that the blade comes in at a much sharper angle. It's like the difference between trying to chop in like that or just skate off. This low angle cuts a little easier. Now it's deceptive. The bevel's on top. So the bevel on top means that the angle that you see the blade at is not really the angle that it cuts at. It's actually cutting, to put the bevel of the plane in 90-degree perspective to the part, it's like this. This is a number 4 plane. It has almost the same angle. You can pick up a block plane. Now this one has several adjustments that the standard ones don't. This is a little Stanley 110. Very simple. Hardly any adjustment on it at all. You've got a blade that sits into the back of the mouth and lays on that. And then you've got a clamp that holds the blade in position. And you have to just kind of feel it around and get it where you want it. And then tighten it up. And you tighten up that little jack screw it pushes this clamp up and locks the blade in place. They work. They're inexpensive. And you keep in mind what a chisel actually is. If you keep in mind what a plane is a fixed chisel. The plane blade acts like a chisel, like most things, and the body of the plane holds the chisel, or the plane blade, the proper angle to cut the part. It also reduces the amount of depth that you can force the blade into the wood. This one, having more adjustments, lets you change the depth and open and close the mouth. And this allows you to set the gap between the mouth and the blade. Flipping it to this side closes it. Flipping it to this side opens it. Now, the idea behind an open or closed mouth on a blade, the idea behind an open or closed mouth on a plane is the closed mouth, which is closer to the blade, prevents the blade from fracturing or breaking off the chip instead of slicing it. Lets you cut a thinner chip, especially in curly material, you know, like being able to set the mouth of the, being able to set the front edge of the mouth close to the blade means that when you're cutting something that has a twisty grain, like curly maple or something, especially curly maple that has, it's a hard wood and it wants to fracture before it bends. So the closed mouth rides close to the blade and holds down the wood so that the blade, as it goes along, it lifts the chip off, doesn't tear the chip. You don't end up with those rips and holes in your wood from tear out. That's the advantage of the closed. That's the advantage of the open. That's the advantage of the adjustable mouth. This one doesn't have that. You can move the blade closer to the front edge, and 99% of the time this is going to do everything you're going to want if what you're doing is breaking edges and doing the occasional in-grain. If you get into something larger where you need to flatten something, a small plane tends to ride on the surface. If you have ripples and waves in the surface, anything longer than the body of the plane will ride over the top, and it'll be like a ship on the ocean. Whatever the wave is, the wave stays. A longer plane will ride and cut the top off the waves and ripples, and it'll tend to flatten them down. Now, number 4 is kind of short if you're going to be doing benches. It's okay, but it's a lot more work. That's where number 5 comes in handy. Number 5, sometimes called a jack plane, jack of all trades. The number 5 is one of the most common planes sold. The 4 and the 5, kind of a tag team on those. The 4 has a lot of advantages. It's small, it's inexpensive, it fits in a toolbox, easy to carry, does almost everything that the 5 does. But if you're joining something, if you want to have a flat top on a table or a bench, you want to go with a longer body. And you can see the difference between the 4 and the 5 is quite dramatic. Now the 5 will do almost everything that a 4 will do. And a lot of that is in the setup. I use this one on my shooting board, so I have the edge sharpened right down to as fine a edge on it as I can get. I've got it polished up. This will cut in grain just as well as any of these other 3, but that's because I've set the blade up to do that. On a shooting board, your chances of cutting in grain are pretty good. And being able to take off a chip that stays together on end grain rather than turning into powder, that means you got a lot better shot at having a flat, straight surface when you're done. So if I had my druthers, first plane I would buy, if I was a guy new to planing and new to using hand tools, would be a number 4. Number 4 is going to do almost everything okay. If you've only got enough money for one plane, a number 4 will do it. If you're going to get into anything, which you probably will almost immediately, joining an edge, planing the edge of a door, squaring up a piece of wood, the longer length of the number 5 makes it really good at that. Now this is a corrugated base. This is a corrugated sole on this plane. Corrugation's nice, it's not a requirement. I think it was a selling point for Stanley to say that they had corrugated soles on their planes. I haven't noticed any difference. I've got several of them. Doesn't seem to make much change. Goal achieved. I've got the end squared up, and I'm just going to round this off. Now you'll notice me setting planes down on the surface of the workbench, sometimes with the blade down, sometimes with the blade on its side. On a wooden bench, if that blade is that fragile that you're going to damage the blade by setting it on a piece of wood, how are you going to ever cut anything with it? If you're working in a shop where there's a bunch of people, like your high school teacher was telling you about, setting the plane on the side means that all the damage is going to happen to the side of the plane, because somebody left a clamp on the bench and you dropped your plane on top of it. You haven't damaged the edge of the blade. Now the shop teacher had to go through every night and sharpen up all the blades that people screwed up. He didn't want to spend his days sharpening plane blades because some 12-year-old kid didn't know enough to put the blade down right. He didn't want to spend his nights and weekends sharpening things just because some 12-year-old kid didn't understand to put the plane on its side. So he chewed you out. It's your shop. If you damage the blade, you fix it. Make your choices. For me, I put it down whichever way seems to be right at the time. And I'm not too worried about whether I'm going to do it exactly the way Mr. Reed told me to, or Mr. Stanley told me to. I'm a long ways from high school. Goal achieved. I've got the end squared up, and I'm just going to round this off. Now you'll notice me setting planes down on the surface of the workbench, sometimes with the blade down, sometimes with the blade on its side. On a wooden bench, if that blade is that fragile that you're going to damage the blade by setting it on a piece of wood, how are you going to ever cut anything with it? If you're working in a shop where there's a bunch of people, like your high school teacher was telling you about, setting the plane on the side means that all the damage is going to happen to the side of the plane, because somebody left a clamp on the bench and you dropped your plane on top of it. You haven't damaged the edge of the blade. Now the shop teacher had to go through every night and sharpen up all the blades that people screwed up. He didn't want to spend his days sharpening plane blades because some 12-year-old kid didn't know enough to put the blade down right. He didn't want to spend his nights and weekends sharpening things just because some 12-year-old kid didn't understand to put the plane on its side. So he chewed you out. It's your shop. If you damage the blade, you fix it. Make your choices. For me, I put it down whichever way seems to be right at the time. And I'm not too worried about whether I'm going to do it exactly the way Mr. Reed told me to, or Mr. Stanley told me to. I'm a long ways from high school. Okay, I think we got a curve on there good enough to do what I want to do. If you have any suggestions for a new video, questions about today's video, or any of the other videos on the channel, just drop a note in the comments. You know I read them all. And I've got 4 or 5 really good ones in the past week. Thanks a lot, guys. Keep them coming. Thanks for watching.